Hi, I'm David Stein of Money for the Rest of Us, and in this video, I answer the question, what determines your pay? Recently, in episode 231 of the Money for the Rest of Us podcast, I addressed this question. I'm here in Mexico, and the security guard at the hotel where we're staying asked me, why is it that he and other Mexicans make so little relative to other individuals in the United States or even other workers within Mexico? So when you look at that, I discussed it in the podcast, there are some things that determine why one occupation pays more than another. It comes down to supply and demand. Sometimes there are barriers to entry for certain occupations. If you're a security guard, you don't need some training, but not a whole lot. Whereas if you're a doctor, you need additional training. And that training is sort of a barrier because not everyone can be a doctor. But in addition, there's credentializations, there's licenses that you might need, things that keep the supply of workers down. Meantime, you need demand from, now how much is that particular service demanded? And particularly what type of business profits are there in order to pay the workers? Because one of the things you find out in terms of how much an individual makes, an individual could have the same, say they're an engineer with one company, and there's another engineer with another company, very similar skill set, similar job description, but one makes more. And the reason why is companies that generate higher profits are able to pay their workers more. Those companies tend to be more productive, more efficient, or there's some network effect that allows them they have higher profits, and as a result, they can pay more to that worker. The same thing works at a country level. If companies are more efficient, more productive in terms of how much they can produce per worker in a given country, they will be able to pay their workers more than a country such as Mexico, which isn't able to produce as much. An example I gave in the podcast is here in the Yucatan where we're staying, they produce about 0.67 tons of corn per hectare of ground. So about 100 acres, 0.67. In the U.S., they produce 10 tons of corn per 100 acres. And that's a big difference. And as a result, farmers in the U.S. will make more. Now, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to how profitable a company is. What is the demand for that particular skill? What is the supply? Is there something limiting supply in terms of credentialization? And then afterwards, I got an email from a listener that says, well, what about endocrinologists? There's a huge shortage of them right now, yet they're one of the lowest paid specialties in the medical field. So why aren't they making more? So when I looked into it, it turns out that there's only about 160 new endocrinologists trained or essentially entering the profession each year because that's how many fellowships there are. There's a limited amount of fellowships for that training. So the supply is limited. Why aren't their salaries higher? Well, it turns out in researching it, the pay for endocrinologists is dependent on what third-party payers, such as the federal government and insurance companies, will pay for endocrinology services. And because that pay is being essentially kept down by these third-party payers, it's not a free market. It's not unfettered. There's some restrictions there. And that's keeping the pay for endocrinologists from going higher as it would if it was an unfettered market. And so supply and demand even works in the medical field, but if there's some artificial constraint, in this case on the payment, then that can keep salaries down. So when you're looking at why are you paid a given amount, depends on your skill, depends on how profitable the company is that you're working for, depends on the demand for your services, what's keeping the supply of similar skilled workers there, are there high barriers to entry? And that's why you're paid what you're paid. Now, one thing you can do is try to be unique in terms of your skill set, in terms of people. Do companies hire you because you're an engineer, or do they hire you because you are you and you have a unique personality, something unique you bring to the table? That's what sets you apart and lets you leverage your particular skill set. So if you have any questions on this video, you can go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Thanks.